From the studio that has won no awards whatsoever comes the podcast that should have already been canceled. Welcome to another episode of Have You Read This? A podcast for bookworms, lovers of sarcasm, and those dangerously close to overdosing on caffeine. Load up on ibuprofen, because here comes 15 minutes of your life you'll never be able to get back.
Since I am a grumpy, middle-aged fart, I thought it would only be appropriate to kick off this episode with the proper amount of complaining. Some days I feel like that's the only thing that I'm good at. And I'm not going to name the name of this Facebook group, but let's just say that it's a pretty big group. It's a pretty active group. I think there's something around 2 million posts every minute. And this focuses on a specific genre of reading. And I'm sure you can get recommendations from this group, but some of these people posting there make me think that they need their internet service revoked. For example, anytime I log in, I can expect to see something along the lines of this. I'm about to DNF this book. I'm only 20% in. Is it worth it to finish? I'm having such a hard time with this one. Look, Carol, if you can sit and read a 300-page book, then you should be able to decide if you like it or you don't. Just put it back and start reading something else. We don't need 90 of these posts every day. Or better yet, if the book sucks, don't post on Facebook. It would be somewhat more tolerable if the book that these folks were asking about was one that nobody mentions. But it's always the exact same book posted over and over and over again. And another thing that happens daily in this group is this person is the busiest reader on the entire planet. They're so busy, they don't have time to write out a full post. And all they post is something like books about ghosts. That's it. Books about ghosts. Like, just imagine their life. They want recommendations on the next book to read that's going to be 300-400 pages. They got time for that. But when it comes to writing out something a little bit more detailed, nope. That's it. We draw the line there. They don't have access to things like Google or Goodreads. And if you're listening to this and you're one of those people, after you beat your forehead into the nearest wall 20 times, I want you to head over to my website and find this article that I wrote about how to use AI to get book suggestions. Stop posting stupid crap on Facebook. And no, I'm not going to leave the group. I'm going to hang around and keep reading it just so I can continue to be annoyed and complain about it. Anyway, so I just finished reading The Rings of Saturn by Sebald. I'm reading now A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. And I wish I could remember how this one was recommended to me, but I was super surprised when this thing showed up. It's filled with beautiful illustrations by Jim Kay, printed on thick, glossy paper. The layout is great. And the entire book is treated quite artistically. It's right up my alley. I'm about maybe halfway through with it, and I love it. It's got kind of a magical, mysterious vibe to it. It's really good so far. I'm also listening to Stolen Tongues by Felix Blackwell. And what I'm going to read next, not entirely sure, kind of leaning towards a book titled Hannah Coulter by Wendell Berry. When we were at Naughty Dog Books in Indiana, I asked one of the employees there, I was like, hey, what's your favorite book of all time? One book. And do you have it here? And Hannah Coulter by Wendell Berry was what she picked. So I didn't ask anything else. I just went and bought it. And that's been kind of a cool thing. Ask somebody what their favorite book is, one single book, and then go pick it up and read it. Don't read anything else about it or reviews or anything like that. I probably need to read The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna, because my friend Victoria keeps threatening to stab me if I don't. So there's that. Earlier in the year, I read a book by Claire Dederer titled Monsters, A Fan's Dilemma. And the general premise of this book is how can we as fans balance the outrage that we have over the monster that a person ends up being with the love of the work that they created. And Dederer goes into depth about the likes of Hemingway, Polanski, Miles Davis, Picasso, even touches briefly on the likes of Bill Cosby and Michael Jackson. She also attempts to answer the question of does a person actually have to be a monster in order to be such a great artist? Like, is that a requirement? And I'm not really diving into that last question I'm kind of staying clear of that. I think there's times when I get done with a book and I think that the person wrote it had to be a monster or in some way connected with that. I mean, how else could they write a story like that? And I realize that's probably a little unfair. I'm not saying that everybody is a terrible person, but anyway, that's a story for another episode. And I also probably should mention, I don't want to get into any legal trouble. I'm not saying when I talk about any of these things that definitely for sure they have happened, 100% factual. Anything discussed here in book terms of what a person is said to have done is not stated as fact unless there's some kind of court case proving it or documentation, anything like that. So from here on out, just pretend I'm using the word allegedly with everything. When I read Dederer's book, I thought it was pretty thought-provoking. I might have been one of the few people, I think, not entirely frustrated by it, at least according to Goodreads reviews. I mean, good grief. Some of y'all really came after this thing. The phrase cancel culture came to mind, obviously, when I was reading it. An actor, athlete, artist, musician, or politician does or says something insanely stupid or highly illegal and they get canceled. Unless you're, of course, Logan or Jake Paul. How are these morons still around? This happens sometimes even without a person necessarily being labeled as a quote-unquote monster. And when the world discovers that they really are truly terrible or evil, I think it becomes pretty easy to just write them off and like anything that they have created. There was still, I think, some separation for me in Dederer's book because none of the people she discussed I had really any real, true emotional ties to. That being said, if you pick up that book thinking there is a definite answer about what we should do with this dilemma about them being monsters, then you'd be wrong. I think the best part of this book that she wrote is the discussion that it sparks. I've had some pretty good conversations so far about it. But anyway, back to the emotional ties. This book had kind of been out of my mind until I came across some recent headlines about one of my all-time favorite authors, Cormac McCarthy. And headlines such as, let's be honest with ourselves, Cormac McCarthy groomed a teenage girl. And just like Georgia Tech taking UGA into 8 overtimes, it was not news I was expecting at all. And from what I can gather, a journalist for Vanity Fair was the one to quote unquote break this story. And the article starts out in part with this. When he was 42, Cormac McCarthy fell in love with a 16-year-old girl he met by a motel pool. Augusta Britt would go on to become one of the most significant and secret inspirations in literary history, giving life to many of McCarthy's most iconic characters across his celebrated novels and Hollywood films. For 47 years, Britt closely guarded her identity and story until now. They were said to have a physical relationship, which Britt claims was consensual and was said to have first happened when he was 43 and she was 17. I've seen that this started when she was 14. I've read several different things, none of which I know for a fact that I can state as true, but it definitely brings up a lot of questions, not the least being the legality of it all. Many cannot see this through any other lens than that of grooming. After all, and this kind of blew my mind, Britt claims McCarthy doctored her birth certificate in order to get her moved to Mexico with him. And beyond all this, like she's said to have produced, I think something like 50 letters between the two. I can't think of anyone I have ever mailed 47 letters to. I can't think of somebody I probably mailed 10 letters to. And this guy was notoriously private while he was alive, and there's not a lot of information about him, but Britt has opened new doors to that. I've now read another article where these quote-unquote McCarthy scholars, I had no idea that these people existed, debate the claims in this Vanity Fair story, specifically the influence of Britt on the work of McCarthy. They're not surprised that there was a relationship there, and I think a lot of them, they claim to have known about this. They just doubt whether she was as much of an influence as she's claiming. I even read that she's coming out of the woodwork now because she's trying to get money out of all of this. I don't know. What I have seen so far is that there's a lot of new information that not everyone agrees on, which really, should that surprise anybody? There are people working on McCarthy's biography, and I have zero doubts I'll be reading that as soon as it's released. McCarthy's personal archives, which are at someplace, the Whitliff Collections at Texas State University, those are supposed to open up next fall, and these are archives that include his private journals, early writings, photographs, family memorabilia, and correspondence with close friends. What all of this will end up doing to his legacy is still to be determined, I think, though some have already canceled him and stated they will not be sharing anything about his works. I think one of the things, as I've gone through this, it doesn't appear that this relationship with Britt is fabricated. Learning that one of your favorite authors possibly groomed and had intercourse with a minor, and, bonus, also forged legal documents to move her to Mexico while still being married. Obviously, that comes packed with many, many emotions for me. None of it sits well with me at all. But does this change the talent that was McCarthy? Does this mean we're not allowed to enjoy his work anymore? And I think that's, for me, I'm trying to figure out where, I say where we draw the line, but where do I draw the line? I remember in school, whenever we studied literature, we always had to learn about the author and what was happening in their world at the time and what shaped their perspective. All of this made them who they are. So it's hard to separate the author from the work that they create. And I'm wondering, I don't see how that can happen with McCarthy. We can't separate him from the work that he's created, can we? And I've asked several people kind of about this dilemma, as I'm labeling it, and if they're able to separate work from the person that created it. And honestly, I was expecting them to say something like, oh yeah, if I find out something did something terrible, yeah, that's it for me. I can cut them off, no problem at all. But the answers that I got were far more mixed. Some of them even said the work they liked was powerful enough to overlook the person that created it. And I still think there's got to be a line somewhere. Like if Hitler was a fantastic painter, can you really say, well, you know what, but look how talented he was? Like, I just think that there's a line somewhere. And I also got some personal reflections, such as people realizing they themselves were not perfect and not really in a position to judge. And I get that. For me, I'm just trying to come to grips with consuming what I want to consume and really not feeling guilt for either enjoying the work or just battling with it so much that I really can't consume it at all. If you got this far and you were expecting me to give you some profound answer or insight, then you must be new here. Since I love call to actions, I guess that's probably a marketing background in me. I love these things so much. Here's one for those bored enough to have made it this far into the episode. I want you to think of your favorite author, actor, musician, celebrity, whatever it is. And then I want you to imagine them being found guilty of a truly terrible crime. Does that change how you interact with what they created? But don't email them to me. Don't tag me. I really don't care that much. Go bore someone else with your nonsense. If you're interested in any of the articles or interviews that I found online, I also found some great deep dives from YouTube that I think were worth sharing. Head over to haveyoureadthispodcast.com and look for the Monsters in McCarthy episode, and all of the goodies will be buried there. Until next time.
I hope the Xanax lasted you through all of that nonsense. Since you are still here, it would give my undies a tingle if you drop a 5-star review. Follow Have You Read This Podcast on Instagram, or I will beat you to death with my walker. Now get me out of here and get me my back pills.